So, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Sasha Lewis Bush. I'm the director of the Nancy Willard and Eric Lindbloom Archives, and I'm also the curator of this exhibition, A Feel for the Place. Just before we begin, it is still pandemic times, so that's a lot of stress and a lot of crazy stuff is going on. And for those of you who are teachers or students like myself, it's sort of the beginning of the school year. And that's a lot of excitement and also stress and lesson planning. I still have my final syllabi to finish after this talk to hopefully be ready for my students on Monday. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. I just wanted to give you a quick background on our space before I introduce our artists, and then I will ask all of our artists who are here to introduce themselves, and then we're going to have a conversation. I have a few questions. I will actually show you the exhibition, which is up on our website, and we'll have a conversation for 30, 45 minutes, something like that, and then we will open it up for questions. So this exhibition, A Feel for the Place, is a celebration in a lot of different ways. So our project space opened in June of 2021. And James Lindbloom, who is the son of Nancy Willard and Eric Lindbloom, James and I decided a year ago that we wanted to use Nancy and Eric's house as a project space. So the project space opened in July of 2021. It closed in July of 2022. And so this exhibition both marks sort of the closing of our space and also the 1-year anniversary of the space. And in that 1 year, we had 9 exhibitions and numerous school walkthroughs, artist talks, and different events at that space. So really, we used it sort of as a real community center in Poughkeepsie. As the curator, I wanted to just quickly, I wanted to have a collective portrait of this space. Rather than having this be one person photographing our project space, I wanted it to be a collective portrait. And I wanted to have really a good mix of people come photograph the space. So we have in this group, it's amazing, we have recently started or recently begun photographers, newer photographers, we have longtime practitioners, we have people who are a mix of ages, we have people from all over New York, which is awesome. We have, recently graduated high school students and college students and, longtime professionals. So it's a really good mix. So it feels very intentionally interdisciplinary. I wanted really to see, I worked in our project space for a year, and I was really curious to see what other photographers would see in that space. So the photographers who are in this exhibition are photographers who do community work. So they take pictures of places, they take pictures of their neighbors, they take pictures of stories that are important to them. And to celebrate our project space, I really felt it was important to invite these photographers because this project space, all of these different things that we did over the year happened because of all of you, happened because of the people who came to the shows and the artists themselves. So it was a real sort of community space made by many, and it felt appropriate to have that as these 6 photographers. Yeah, so that's kind of the background of the exhibition. I'll just add as well that this exhibition marks an exciting new phase for our archives. This is the inaugural online exhibition. So we are hoping in the future, James and myself, that we're going to have more shows on our website, which up until now has really been a space that's dedicated for to celebrate Nancy Willard and to celebrate Eric Lindbloom, and as a space to get to see their archives. But we are hoping that in the future, our website becomes a space where we can have more exhibitions that are related to Nancy's work or related to Eric's work, and that serves sort of as a space for community building and emerging photographers and all the different meanings of what that means, and for emerging photographers and curators to make that space and sort of continue to honor Nancy and Eric's legacy, and also make new work. So I'm going to share my screen right now. And here we go. This is the launching of this exhibition. So in order of who we have here, I will ask first, Sarah, can you introduce yourself? Sarah is one of our artists. I'll ask all the artists to introduce themselves and tell us where are you located right now. So Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, I'm Sarah Adriani. I'm calling in from Astoria, Queens today. I really love doing this project with Sasha and having him invite us. So super excited to be here with you guys.
Awesome, thank you. Christine, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Callahan. I'm zooming in from New Jersey, and I absolutely love this project. It was a pleasure to photograph the space and to be in the space. And so I'm really happy to be here with all of you.
Awesome, thank you. Jesus, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, guys, welcome and thank you for coming. My name is Jesus Rodriguez. Actually, Jesus Emmanuel is an artist. And yes, welcome.
Awesome, great. Where are you coming from today?
Oh, I'm coming from living in the Bronx. Yes, I have to go to Poughkeepsie. But yes, I'm an artist here in the Bronx. I actually work for the Bronx Documentary Center and doing documentaries since then.
Awesome, thank you. Let me just see, I'm not sure if Sadia is with us, but Sadia, are you with us? No, okay. Sadia is one of our other artists who's not with us. That's totally fine. So Joanne, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us where you are calling in from today?
Hi, I'm Joanne Vallejo, and I'm calling from Poughkeepsie, and I'm about a quarter mile from Eric and Nancy's house right now. And it was quite eye-opening to photograph that space because I've walked by that house probably 1,000 times and never went inside it until this past year.
Awesome, thank you. And Alexis, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell us where you're calling in from.
Hi, I'm Aresis Tiburcio-Sane, and I'm calling in from Harlem in Manhattan. Who's working on this project.
Awesome. Great, thank you. So I have a few questions. We'll get going. My first question for all of you, for all of our artists here, is, I was writing this curatorial statement and I was thinking about the space and the name for the exhibition, A Feel for the Place, came from, I'm just gonna leave this up here for a minute and then I will start scrolling through. I'm gonna have to stop sharing my screen for a minute so we can actually see these images larger. But these are, this is this group. The name for the exhibition, A Feel for the Place, came because a lot of people who came to the space, who exhibited in the space, told me, and I heard it from different people, that the space had like a really interesting particular energy and warmth to it, just like the feel of it, the sound of it. It's an old creaky house. Nancy and Eric lived in that space for over 50 years in their home, right? So I just wanted to ask first impressions for any of our artists who wants to, why don't we, Joanne, since you said you you passed that house 1,000,000 times, right? What were your first impressions with photographing that space? Then I'll kick it to somebody else.
When I first walked into the house, I was hoping to see something of Nancy and Eric's lives there, and what I saw was completely different than what I expected. I forget what the exhibit was that was there the first time I went to the house. But I remember thinking as I walked through that these were contemporaries of mine, and I lived a quarter mile from their house and probably passed them in the street, I don't know how many times, walking or biking in the neighborhood. And I never really got to meet them or know them. And it occurred to me that I felt a real sense of loss, that space had been there for so many years and they had been there for so many years, and I missed that opportunity. So it was an interesting feeling as I walked in the house. I had a sense of the creativity and the whimsy that was there, but I also felt a sense of loss of they weren't there. Their spirits might be, but they weren't there. And it was a lost opportunity. So it was an interesting sort of yin and yang.
Thank you. That's interesting. Okay, so it's surprising. I also I know this space very well, so this is wonderful for to hear these different impressions. Alexis, do you want to tell us what were your first impressions?
Yeah, so I'm from the city, so anytime I go any place outside, it's always like a little bit of a culture shock. Just seeing houses is always really interesting to me, and going in and like automatic like first step and the floor starts to creak. I was like, oh my goodness, what is going on? And I think it made me actually a little bit nervous at first, like first stepping in. But as I started to walk around and look at all the puppets and all the artwork that was there, I think it was really comforting. And I even started playing music, and that just made it more inviting. And I was like, okay, like I feel welcome, like I feel like at peace in this place. So it was really interesting how like I changed from being kind of nervous to like being okay in this place.
Thank you. It is daunting too. I have to say, it's a huge accomplishment what these photographers did, because you heard they're coming from the Bronx, from Harlem, from Astoria, right, from even Poughkeepsie, to step into a space and make these pictures, is a huge accomplishment because it was challenging. It had its own particular quirks about it. Christine, do you want to jump in? Tell us what were your first impressions?
Well, I was first invited to the space by Sasha because we were going to organize an exhibition, which was the In Good Company, that ran from August to October of 2021. So it just felt very strange to walk into a house and immediately feel a nostalgia. Like I never lived there, but there was this connection of artists that have lived there and made work. And seeing Eric's darkroom was really magical. I mean, as a photographer, I feel like I've always dreamed about having a darkroom like in my house, like that, like what's better than that? And there it was. So yeah, it felt like, when me and Sasha were putting the show together, what is this artist's playground that we have been given? And it just felt so, just like an honor to have that space to think about photography. We put a photography show together, and then to be asked to photograph the place was even more interesting, to spend time there, and to just like be in the space and spend time. And what I couldn't photograph was the smell, because when you walk in, it's an old house and it has this distinct old house smell, which is like really comforting. And yeah, it just like I wanted to just hang out there.
It's great, thank you. Jesus, jump in. What were your first impressions of the space?
Well, I'm Puerto Rican. I was raised and grew up and I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. For me, like Aresis, like living from the city is like an experience, because you could see different type of like architecture, different type of like nature and etc. Right? So when I was asked for you to be part of this group and go to Poughkeepsie, I never been in Poughkeepsie, so it was my first time in Poughkeepsie, and I was kind of like expecting to see a house, a beautiful house, like the ones that you see out of the city, like very typical, different levels. So basically, when I got there, I found the house that I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting like my friend here, Christine says that it was empty. I'm sorry, Joanne says that it was empty. So my impression was empty in a sense because in that moment there was an exhibition from Danny Peralta. So the whole space was filled with like art and stuff, but none of this stuff were belonging from the people who used to live in this house. So I kind of got worried about it. So in this first day, I just did a few shots, just like understanding the house and understanding and feeling the space. But yeah, it was kind of like difficult for me to start a project from a house because for me, a house is to talk about the people who live in it or who had lived there or whatever, and you have to see, I was expecting to see something from these people, but eventually I kind of like did my research. I understood about the house, understood about the region, and I came out with this idea of photographing the house in a peculiar way. I'm a documentary, so for me, it's about storytelling, and in this moment, I was trying to do something similar, but later on, I discovered how to. But actually, in the beginning, when I started shooting, I was trying just to, like I said, like do some space or structural photography to see where it could lead me, and it was. I have to say, this house was very special because there was so many details left. Not only the details, there was also the work of Nancy in one room and the dark room of Eric in another one. And but all around the house, there was things that belonged to them, especially to Nancy. And I think that was the most valuable thing about this project because Nancy kind of triggered that creativity aspect of imagination and all that with me because what I see, the elements that I saw. I don't know if you guys noticed that in the backyard, there's like little rocks and like crystals and all this beautiful stuff like around the whole backyard. So for me, that was a click, and that's what I could say in my first impression.
Thank you. Great, Sarah. Round us out. Tell us about your first impressions.
Like Christine said, like something you can't capture in images or videos, a sense of smell. And when I walked into the house and the floors creak, and Sasha, I think you had an incense burning near the kitchen sink on one of the photo reels from the dark room, so it would sit properly. The space itself had its own life there, and we got to document it. With my own personal practice, I like to go into houses that are evolving and they're changing and from what they used to be. So capturing like the last little essence of Eric and Nancy's life in that house was really, really life altering because you can still see the snippets and the few pieces that are left because the furniture was gone. Like there was no family photos up. It's the murals, the tiles, the dark room, the things that they hadn't fully taken out because I was there while you were installing, I think, flying geese. So the small pieces that were left of them is what I focused on in their space to feel like their story was still there.
Thank you. I'm going to just do this for a second and actually, so now we can look closer, and I'm going to just flip through as I keep asking our artists some questions. But thank you all for sharing. So I'm going to open it up. To ask, you know, as a number of you have said, you had ideas of what you thought you might want to do with the house, and then you got to the house and you saw something different. You had reacted to different smells. There's the backyard. I think, Sarah, you were just mentioning snippets, which is funny. This is Joanne's title for one of her photographs here. So to any of the artists, and we can jump around, I'm just curious, what was challenging? You know, a number of you talked about what was challenging, and maybe what did you enjoy most about photographing in this space?
For me, one of my challenges, which also is one of the things that I enjoyed the most, was kind of figuring out when the sun would hit certain windows specific. I just thought that was really fun to see, just like how it would light up the whole room. But then if, you know, I was thinking of a photo that I wanted to take in a certain place and the sun hadn't hit that specific room yet, I have to time myself and be like, okay, let me stay here for 30 minutes and then run downstairs so that I make it in time. So it was a fun challenge, at least.
I think my challenge was Nancy's room off to the side. When you first walked in the house, it was completely just jam-packed with an entire life's body of work, and you were trying to finagle to walk through there so you didn't disturb the artwork but still document it.
I think for me, the challenge was to try to photograph that mural on the staircase, which I'm glad that there's an excellent picture of. I tried many times, very hard to photograph, and you know, just felt like really a part of the house, like how an artist makes their work and then the house is like a part of the work, and how that is mixed and integrated. It was really interesting. And
I'm gonna keep flipping around, keep going.
yeah, there's I can't remember whose picture of the mural, maybe when you get to it. There's there it is. I mean, I guess my question is that, does that stay with the house?
That does stay with the house. You know, who knows? The new, you know, the house is in the process of being sold, so who knows what the new owners are going to do with that space, and with the house and with that mural. But that was definitely, I'll say, just as a brief background, I asked all of our artists in the show, I said, please photograph the mural, please photograph Eric's darkroom, photograph Nancy's room, which is as you entered the house, there's a room with all of Nancy's creatures, all of her things, and please photograph the backyard. Those are the three spaces I wanted documentation of, but then I told each of our artists, I said, how you photograph that, what you do with that is totally up to you. So you can move creatures around, Nancy's puppets and sculptures and creatures. You can move those around, you cannot, it's totally up to you.
So I had a major challenge just getting in the house. The first couple times I went there, I could not get the lock to work no matter what I would do. And I remember calling Sasha in a panic a couple of times. It was almost as if the house didn't want me to come in. And I was starting to get a little paranoid, but finally I got in. And then I think I missed Sasha's direction to only, you know, to photograph Eric's space and Nancy's space in the backyard. And I wandered myself up to the attic and spent some time up there. And as I came up the stairs, it winds around. And as I came up the stairs, I literally stopped in my tracks because there were shadows everywhere. It was late afternoon there, and there were these shadows, and I found myself immobilized by the shadows, just watching them for a long time. And it was a challenge to get myself up those stairs to get into the attic space and do some photography up there. So those were my two challenges, locks and attics.
I just want to stay with maybe Jesus, you can kick us off with this this question, but I wanted to ask a little bit more about your approach. Each of your approaches, Joanne, you're just talking about the shadows. It's interesting, and that Alessia's just talking about the light and waiting for the light, because the light in our project space in Nancy and Eric's house is really striking and really incredible. And in particular, there's a room in the house that was an addition, which was used as a library, was used as the space. I used it as my office for that year. Eric would use it for looking at prints. And also Nancy stayed there towards the end of her life as well, and so had all these different functions, and but there's a skylight in that room, and it was beautiful, and it was sort of gorgeous. And so it's interesting that you're all commenting on this, because when I think of light in particular, I think about something that James has told me, that Eric was very much interested in chasing the light and was not at all, never photographed in the dark, never photographed at night, never photographed under artificial light. He was very much like, I'm here for the day when the light looks great, or when the light looks like how I want, and then it's done. And then he's not interested. So it's interesting to hear that his interests and Nancy's as well is sort of in that space. But I just wanted to ask about your approach. Jesus, tell us about your approach. You photographed, you came 3 or 4 times, you photographed in a bunch of different spaces. How did the house influence your approach to making pictures?
So because the house was empty, nothing that belongs from them. I understood later when I was doing my research that for us artists, whatever work we do, that is us. That is who we are. That belongs to us. So yes, the house wasn't that empty. It was actually full of creativity and stuff. For example, Nancy's creature. So I'm as a photographer, I practice a lot the portrait, like portraying people, some kind of action, storytelling kind of thing. But I'm more into the portrait side of photography. In this time, I wasn't really sure about what was really looking for in this house. So I let Nancy to tell me what to do, kind of. So I went to do my research about the artists, about Nancy and Eric, and I found out so many special stuff about them. For example, the idea of Nancy create the creatures to inspire her or to help her out to do the children books. For example, different creatures. She created creatures as a sculpture, and she finds stuff around the house or around where she at, and she used those pieces to compose or to create this creature itself. So my challenge was that, so I started playing, because Nancy was a lot about playing and imagination, and I did the same thing. I kind of like grabbed the creatures, I put it around the scenes, looking to find a way of this creature to tell us where the space at, where we at in this space, where we at in this house. The challenge was that to some of these creatures were like, kind of like not broken, but difficult to manipulate. So I found it very difficult because I was shooting with I shoot this project with a large format of film, black and white. And it was difficult for me to work with the creature and work with the camera and noticing what's going on in the space, like the light, the whatever the elements I'm showing, So eventually I decide just to pick up different scenes and tell the story about the house. So I don't know, Sacha, if you're showing something right now.
I have one of your pictures up. This is one of Jesus's photographs that we have up here of the creatures in the backyard.
Explain about this picture, or it will be later?
Oh, just, I wanted I just wanted to ask you and the other artists just, about process, about what the process was like. It's great to hear. It's really interesting to hear you talk about the challenge with the creatures, because, and it's also for me interesting to see, as a curator, how different the visions were from each of these photographers. And, it's the same space, but they look very different. And people's approach with the creatures too. Joanne's approach, for example, with the creatures was very different than Jesus's, right? And so it's interesting to see that, the variation there.
I said, like the imagination and creativity of these two artists, it helped me out to overcome the challenge. If I was really like paying attention to what they were saying. For example, there's a very beautiful documentary of Nancy showing the house, showing the work. And with that one, it kind of clicked in my imagination. And for example, this picture is this is the creature talking about the backyard of the house. So if you see those creatures are not normal creatures, are totally like imaginative, creative, whatever she was thinking in that moment, and that for me was very special. And I think that I overcome the challenge just listening to them.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to talk about a little bit about your approach? Maybe I think all of you or most of you came out, more than once or came for an extended period of time. So maybe talk about your approach. Tell us about your approach, and also just thinking as well about what Jesus was talking about. What did you notice first, or where did you start? Sarah, you mentioned sort of like being overwhelmed with that room of Nancy's work, of all of her creatures and all of her sculptures, all of her pieces. But yeah, if anybody else wants to jump in there, what was your approach to photographing this space?
I can jump in. I did come twice. I started photographing. I came probably midday, and I knew there was no way I was going to be able to finish photographing the space in one trip. This was at least 2 to 3 times sort of a photographic experience. So I think I stuck on the 2nd floor for a little bit, and then my next trip I went on the 1st floor and really delved into Nancy's space. But my first approach when I walked in was I put my camera aside and I walked the space. I didn't necessarily just start photographing right away. I needed to experience the space. And like Araceli said, I needed to see where the light was hitting. I spent a lot of time just sitting in one particular room, watching the light come in and out, how it interacted with curtains, how it hit certain objects, so that I could then photograph the space to show how magical it really was. That mural, I think I photographed both trips, trying to figure out how to balance my tripod on the stairs so that when the sunlight came in and how it would reflect on the mural, especially since that was one of the only pieces you couldn't take from the house. Like Jesus said, the back patio had all these gorgeous like linings with broken teapots and tiles. So things like that I knew wouldn't go with was my approach of focusing, seeing how the light hit, and just trying to understand the lives that happened in that space.
Christine, you talked about this a little bit, but maybe since you're looking right now at Sarah's photograph here of the mural, you talked a little bit about the challenge with this mural, right? And there's a picture that you had of sort of like looking above from below, but what other challenges were there for you?
Well, And by the time that I had come to photograph the space, I had actually spent a lot of time in the space because we had put that show together.
Mhm.
So now I was looking at it as a photographic subject rather than a gallery that, like, how we going to it. We had the problem of the photographs falling off the wall. So now it was a different problem of what are the bare bones of this house. And the day that I came, it was very overcast. It was a little drizzly. And so there was a somberness to it, but I think it was also my my own nostalgia, because I knew that this project was wrapping up and that this house was no longer going to be in your care, so in terms of as an art space. And so I started to feel very nostalgic about the project that we did together, and that and I guess just background for everybody to know, I know Sasha from ICP, and we were friendly, but we weren't really good friends before the pandemic. And he was basically the last person I saw before the pandemic. We had a meeting, we had a physical meeting, we were hanging out at ICP, and literally like 2 days later, it was a pandemic and everything was shut down. So we actually became very good friends during the pandemic. And so yeah, and sort of, and we began a critique group online. And so that led to, which I didn't know that Sasha was involved with this archive project. So by the time I came out to the house for the first time, I was like seeing Sasha for the first time, like, yeah, you know, like off of Zoom as my friend and not just my colleague. And so that was interesting. And then doing that project in the house was really wonderful, because it was in the middle of the like deep, like deep in the pandemic. Like it was October of, or September, what was it? September of 2020.
Yeah.
So like everything was closed. Our opening, we were wearing masks. I mean, so we were meeting our online critique group for the first time in person. Some people had never met. I had never met some of the people for the first time. So the space really felt like it was open to us in this world that was very closed.
Mhm.
And so I have a lot of just warm vibes, you know, about that whole time, and how that helped me so much through, you know, that dark, that dark period. And so this is so interesting to come back around to this now, as I know the pandemic is not over, but things are opening up and open and different. We're in a different phase. So yeah, I think that I added that sort of sense of nostalgia to what were the artists who lived there, you know, and thinking about their lives and how they dedicated their lives to their work. And that there was remnants of that still in the house. And so that was something I was connecting to.
Thank you. Anastasia, you talk about this, and Sarah talked about this too, just sort of sitting with that space before you photographed and observing the light. Can you tell us what your approach was, or you know, did you change your approach upon, you know, sitting with that space, or choosing somewhere else to go, or how you photographed?
Yeah, so I went with Sarah actually, and my approach was the exact opposite. I walked in and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna go straight in. And then I started going up the stairs, and I was like, okay, the light here is nice, but it's a little bit dark here. And so I would stay there and then kind of try and calculate how long it would take. And that's when I started to play my music and just really like kind of wander around like a lost child around the house. And then after I was done with the second floor, I thought, maybe it'd be interesting if I go outside to see, the actual sun, like fully out. So I did that for a little bit, and I headed back inside because I think I was kind of avoiding, like what Sarah said, Nancy's room. So I headed back in there and photographed, but it was really just me playing and exploring this place.
Yeah. Something that you're each talking about, which I hadn't realized, but I think is really interesting to think about. Nancy and Eric, they have their own individual artistic legacies, as Nancy as a poet, as a teacher, as a writer, a children's author, Eric as a photographer and mentor. And they did their own things and they worked together. And so there is, when I think about that project space, a real sense of togetherness in that space. But it's interesting to think about with each of you, your own process, because you are often there by yourself. Alessis and Sarah were there together on one day, but often, you would come to the house and either I would just sort of make sure you had what you needed and then you're off on your own, or as Joanne said, you had the key to the door, right? And you'd go in by yourself. So it's a very solitary activity to be in that space by yourself. Joanne, can you tell us a little bit, you talked a little bit about your approach, but tell us, where did you gravitate to first, and how did the house shape your approach to photographing it?
I think the first time I went and I had so much trouble with the lock, I was sort of standing around in the front yard. There was actually snow on the ground back then. And I was standing on the walkway near the quote on the ground. And I was sort of looking at it. And when I looked up, there was a deer who was sort of maybe 10 feet away looking. I don't know whether it was eating the bush outside Nancy's room or looking in the window or what it was doing, but it just stood there and it looked at me and I looked at it. And finally, I think maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, I finally figured out how to open the door, and I went inside and I took one look into Nancy's room, and I was so overwhelmed by it that I couldn't go in initially. It was too much for me. There were too much stimulation, too many things, too many colors. And so I had to back away from that. And I went upstairs and wandered around up there, looked at one of the exhibits, went up to the attic, came back down again. And then I sort of stood outside Nancy's room and I said, well, here's for it. And I sort of went in. And the first thing I saw was East of the Sun, West of the Moon, the book. Mm-hmm. And there were a pile of them. And it occurred to me that I taught in a school right around the corner from where Nancy and Eric lived. And our 3rd and 4th grade class did that play. And they did it maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. And I remember thinking to myself, well, there's a connection I didn't have any idea about. I didn't remember Nancy's name. I didn't remember her as the author. And I hadn't thought about that in years and years. And so it somehow made it okay then to be in that room with all that stuff. And then I began to see details rather than looking at the whole room as all of that busyness. And I sort of began to see individual puppets for what they were, and trinkets for what they were, and toasters and gems and whatever else was in the room. And I started photographing the details. And thankfully, none of those photographs came out very well. And so I sort of had to ditch all of those and go back again. And then I began to look out from the details to the bigger picture. And then those 2 puppets sort of were just hanging there in the corner. And I sort of put them together and looked at them. And as I looked at their faces, I thought to myself, wow, I wonder if they're sort of waiting for Nancy to come back, because it was almost like suspended animation. They were just there and in a waiting pose. And I thought, wonder what Nancy's thinking about this, seeing these people wandering through her space and her puppets posed in various ways. It just created a lot of questions for me. So, I worked through Nancy's room and then went down to Eric's, or up to Eric's, green, dark room. And that and was another space that was really overwhelming for me because there was so much going on in there. It was hard for me to concentrate. But yeah, Snippets was the name of this. And I looked at all of the things that he had on his bulletin board, tacked every which way, and angles everywhere. And I thought to myself, his clarity of purpose and his clarity of his creative clarity was in such contrast to the way I saw his darkroom. I thought to myself, wow, what a mind he must have had to be able to look at something that cluttered and that jumbled and yet have a clear vision of what he wanted to accomplish. So I was amazed by that.
I have so many more questions for all of our artists, but I also want to be mindful of our time and also have a little space for questions. But I wanted to open it up and ask, a number of you have talked about this, and Joanne, you're talking about this too, sort of like wondering what Nancy would think and what Eric would think, right, about seeing people coming into their spaces. I think that from the many stories that I heard from Eric and Nancy, over the years, their house was very much a space where friends were constantly visiting, and artists, poets and photographers and painters, and were constantly visiting. What happened, how James and I used their house as a space for programs, and how you were photographing it was sort of a continuation of their legacy. But I wonder if anybody of our artists want to offer, what did you, beyond what you said, what did you learn about Nancy and Eric through photographing the house, through photographing their space?
I think the thing I learned is that they made a lot of work. They made a tremendous amount of work and over a long period of time. And that stuck with me, that it was, a lifetime of work. And that's what it takes, I'm so proud of this picture of myself, of mine, because I couldn't get the mural, but I got the darkroom. So I feel like that was a success. I really wanted to capture the amount of stuff that was there and what it felt like to stand in the threshold of that doorway where you're like, oh, there's prints in there, there's notes in there, there's paper in there, there's negatives drying or something, there's so much, there's books, there's secret formulas of how to develop, film, there's all kinds of stuff in there. And I love on the door the poster of the camera work. Like that just is just felt really like he loved photography. I never met him, but I know that he absolutely loved photography, and seeing the type of work that he made and the type of influences of his photographic heroes, and that made me have permission, because I think we would have gotten along great. I think that we would have had a wonderful conversation about photography. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Anybody else? What did you learn about Nancy or Eric or their house or through photographing?
I think you could tell that this was just a really magical space. Like this was a house where like every artist, poet, whatever your art form was, gravitated towards to have a communal space to express themselves. Because they spent their life, like Christine said, making the work that they loved, and they had the people that they cared about come over and discuss all of those critiques and just constantly talking and making about art.
Yeah.
one of the things that struck me was that throughout the space, the yard and Nancy's room, in the kitchen, the bathrooms, was this incredible sense of whimsy. There were things popping up everywhere that were unexpected, little tiles, little gems, little just things on the wall, colors that were painted. And it occurred to me that they had a sense of this whimsy, which can be fleeting in some cases, but in their case, there was this sense of permanence. They weren't afraid to stick tiles on the wall and to paint a mural on the wall and to put things in the backyard that no one else would put in their backyard, but they did because it made them happy, or it created something. And there's a certain element that says, oh, don't do that to your house. What about the resale value? And all I could think of is that was probably the furthest thing from their mind. They were making a space that was creative, that was theirs, that demonstrated the whimsy and the commitment to projects that they had. So I was fascinated by the fact that a lot of people would never do what they did with their house, and it worked for them.
Mm. I'm going to stop my sharing for a second, just so I can pull up the whole exhibition again for all of us to see as we end here. So one thing that one last question, maybe for one or two of our artists who want to answer this. Something that you have all talked about, and I definitely feel is one of Nancy and Eric's individual shared legacies and of this space, is a real strong sense of communal generosity. That space, Nancy and Eric, as Joanne was just saying, made it, a home for themselves, for James, for all of their friends and family, but also for their extended, circle of friends and makers, right? But that, once they had both passed, right, that space, still their spirit really was there and felt strongly and clearly felt strongly by all of you. And that space really had a strong sense of communal generosity because it gave us so much. It made, with all the different things that we did in that space, all the different kinds of shows that we had in that space. So I wonder if we, for two of you, if you just want to, if I ask you, about a sense of communal generosity and of being in this show, in this intergenerational show, right, across photo interests, across ages, across experience, what does that mean to you? Or what does that mean to you in the context of the show or your photographs?
I think to me, it like just being part of the show and seeing everyone's coming from a different place in their life, and just seeing how we're all capable of making art and viewing like one specific place in such different ways is really shows like the importance of community. And I think art making is one of the best ways to bring communities together, because I feel like art is an act of love, So just really being a part of this was really a good experience for me.
I had a question. Is James still on the call with us? Because I want to know, like, James, you live there. What does this look like to you?
That's great. Let's see. I think James is still with us. Yeah, I think he still is with us.
Like, I'm just curious, like what he thinks of his childhood home being photographed in this way and being presented.
Yeah. He might have stepped away for a second. So I will hold off on that question. I do want to ask James. We'll see if he is back. In our last few minutes, I'll have James answer if he is. James, are you with us?
Yeah. How you doing, Stasha? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question on that.
Oh, my question was, James, how are you? What do you think of this? Like, you lived there, you grew up there. I don't know how long you lived there, but like, what does this look like to you?
I was
Seeing
there
your
for
home.
the first 18 years of my life, and you know, it had always been a home base. You know, coming back for holidays and seeing my parents for the next several decades after that. So it's yeah, it's kind of fascinating hearing people's reaction to it in a state. You know, it was no longer a home that anyone was living in. It was kind of acting as a storage space in that one room for my mother's creatures and of course my dad's dark room. But just hearing, you know, everyone's take on it from walking into the house and getting some sense of the lives that were lived there. It's kind of fascinating.
That's great. Thank you, James, for sharing. I'll just open up. We have a few minutes left, so maybe time for one question. But if anybody has a question for our photographers, please ask away. I'm just checking the chat. Okay. In that case, thank you so much, everybody, for thank you for joining us. Thank you to our photographers for taking the time to photograph. I'm still thinking about what you are all saying and just sticking with what Adesi said, which is a good way of summing up what all of you said in different ways, that photography and art making is an act of love. And it feels like your pictures of the space really do have, you know, a real sense of generous lovingness to them and lovingness to the space and to Nancy and Eric's legacies and lives there, and to James's life there as well, you know, while living there and coming back. So it feels it's a really special show. So I'm going to just pull this up again just for everybody to see. The exhibition is up on our website, which is the Nancy Willard and Eric Lindbloom archives.org. And here it is, a feel for the place. So thank you all for joining. That's where you can see the work. I strongly encourage you to go spend some more time with it, because each of those images is wonderful and really special. Yes, somebody's asking, thank you. So I will post the link for everybody in the chat here. So the link is there if you want to go check it out. Hopefully we will have some more exhibitions. This is the first of many on our website. Thank you to everybody and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha.
Present.